G'day all. I'm looking to see if anyone has had a similar experience or may have an explanation for us. A bit of background information. This is my auntie's encounter from last night, 18th of June 2020, in New South Wales, Australia. It occurred at approximately 9:30 p.m. Earlier that day, she had driven past a motorcycle accident which had resulted in a fatality. My auntie, we'll call her Terry, has always been slightly psychic and has had several encounters with spirits and past family members throughout her life, but has never seen anything like this or experienced the sense of dread that came with it. Last night after work, Terry was driving home along a stretch of road that is surrounded by bushland on either side. Upon driving up over a slight hill, she saw a figure standing on the tree line, illuminated by her headlights. The figure immediately had her full attention, and a total sense of dread came over her entire body. She described it as a constricting bubble. This figure stood approximately 8 feet tall, had elongated limbs, was completely white, had no clothes, no genitals, and no face. The figure was directly facing her and turned to track the car as she drove past. Terry immediately began sobbing and called my mother, stating she had just seen a terrible, horrible thing on the side of the road. She drove down the same road today to find an explanation, but found nothing. It was almost a Slender Man type figure. We have spoken to a few people, and here are some of the explanations so far. One friend suggested that it may have been the victim of the crash earlier in the day, trying to leave Earth, but had become stuck on the way up. Another friend believes that it was some kind of guardian angel, sending her a sign of some kind. It is believed that angels may present themselves in a seriously striking form as a distraction to save or warn you of something. Maybe she was speeding and it stopped her from having an accident. I'd like to add that my auntie or myself are not religious at all, but all of our family has been baptized and finds comfort in the idea that there are people looking out for us. We would love to hear your thoughts and ideas on what she may have experienced. Cheers.
We don't get the kind of stuff down here that I see a lot of on this sub. A lot of it's Native American folklore I see here, which is creepy as hell, but I feel like our stuff is of a different world altogether. I've seen some stuff. A lot of it, we don't even know what to call. Our First Nation stories aren't as well documented as your Native American stories are, sadly. A lot of it got all but wiped out during the colonial years, and far beyond, come to think of it. But there are bits and pieces. There are voices that keep the old stories alive, and a few of them seem to tie in pretty neatly with what we saw that night. Me and my best mate, Gavin, we grew up together in Home Hill, one of the two townships either side of the mighty Burdekin River. You got Ayr, the bigger of the two towns on one side, and our sleepy little town on the other. We used to camp out a lot when we were growing up, but this was always done simply in our backyards, as we were too young to camp out for real. This all changed when we hit 15 years old. We were finally given the freedom to wander down to the riverside and have little overnight campouts. Now, of course, these excursions came with strict rules, as we lived in croc country. Where we live, it's basically where the Burdekin River meets the ocean, so strictly no swimming, no going near the water's edge, as well as the usual croc-safe stuff. Don't leave food out around your campsite. Set up camp well back from the water, etc. So, here we are, heading out for our first big campout. Oh boy, did we feel like big men. All alone, nothing but our swags, a tent, and a few overnight supplies. Ready to tackle the big wide world. We followed all the rules though. We weren't silly. Growing up here, of course, you hear stories of croc attacks, and believe me, they are not pleasant. And in fact, they stand shoulder to shoulder with any supernatural monster I've read about. Fast forward to nighttime. We're settling into sleep. We're playing silly games, telling each other scary stories, just doing what young fellas do. When in the dead of the night, we pause. We pause because we hear something. A faint sound, but easily identifiable. A faint dragging. This caused us to bolt upright. There's only one thing around here making a sound like that. There's a croc dragging itself up the riverbank towards us. We shut off our torches and we huddled together towards the back of the tent. Gavin started feeling around for his pocket knife. We were planning to cut a hole in the back of the tent and make a run for it. We couldn't go out the front. It would be waiting right there for us. We would be running right into its jaws. The dragging sound continued. Gush, flop, gush, flop. Yeah, no doubt, that's a croc. With trembling hands, we continued fumbling around, looking for the pocket knife to make our escape. But we couldn't find it. That dragging sound was so close now, and we could hear the thing sniffing around. We could hear its guttural noises as it poked around our campsite. This was serious now. We were very much in a life or death situation. We had two options here. We could sit still and just hope that this thing doesn't smell us. Or we could try our luck running out the front tent flap. We tried desperately ripping a hole in the tent with our bare hands, but we just couldn't do it. And the way this tent was built, we couldn't just lift it up and run out the back. We were trapped. Even if we wanted to consider running, honestly, we were frozen in place. I don't think that was ever gonna be an option. I don't know how long we sat frozen like that. I mean, it must have been a matter of less than a minute, but my God, let me tell you, it felt like much longer. Eventually, we heard a different kind of dragging sound, one that went on for much longer and was heading away from our campsite. The croc was dragging itself away. No, the crocodile was being dragged away. We could hear its jaws snapping. We could hear the sound of heavy footfalls. And then we heard the most disgusting sound of flesh tearing, ripping, innards spilling. Oh, it was horrible. Whatever was happening out there, we got the impression that we were now faced with something much worse than a croc. There was something out there, big enough to drag a crocodile and, by the sounds of things, kill it. We continued sitting there, just huddled at the back of that tent. And then there was silence. The animal stopped resisting. and we heard only the sound of a lifeless body falling helplessly to the ground. Then, silence yet again. Silence. Until the sound of heavy footsteps once again reverberated through the still night air. I don't know what the hell we were thinking. We could have just sat there. We could hear the footsteps moving away. We should have stayed put. I don't know. Maybe we thought that because whatever this was had killed the croc, that it was somehow friendly. I don't know. We were stupid kids. We were panicked. We were in a state of shock. But, for whatever stupid, pig-headed reason, we slowly unzipped the flap and stuck out our heads. It was massive. I mean, massive. At least 8 foot tall. Probably bigger. Its limbs were not human. Nah, far from it. They were all cracked and broken and, honestly, looked like this whole thing's body was made of stone. It was lumbering away into the river. It was just walking through the water like it wasn't bothered. It dragged something in its hand. Something long and sharp. I guess that's what mutilated our crocodile. Yeah, that's what else we saw. There certainly had been a croc, but not no more. This was no small specimen either. This crocodile, it must have been at least a 4-meter salty. Its lifeless body lay by the river's edge, a massive cut down its gut. There is nothing out here capable of doing that. Or so we thought. We watched in awe as this thing continued to wander off into the night. As it walked, it released these inhuman sounds. Grunts, grumbles. Those sounds still haunt me today. I have no doubt this thing was not a friend. It was out for blood. The attack, it was just too vicious, too deliberate. It was not there to lend us a hand. That crocodile just happened to be the easiest thing in its path. Maybe it noticed us. Maybe it knew we were in the tent and we were just too much of a hassle to get to. Maybe it didn't know. I don't know. Those questions, they do trouble me though, thinking back. The incident led me to look deeper into Aussie monster stories, to the point that I now have a pretty high level of confidence that what we saw was the Malingi. The First Nations people will tell you stories about him. They too know that he is not a friend. It's actually, at its roots, a bit of a bedtime story that they would use to scare the kids out of wandering off alone. But like all of their tales, it is deeply steeped in reality. Well, I know now for sure that this one is. I don't go to that spot anymore. Far as I'm concerned, that's his territory, and he can keep it. I do warn others about what we saw that night. Tried to tell our parents about what we saw. But of course, they brushed it off as a scared kid's imagination. I've not heard of any more attacks or run-ins with him, and I'm glad for that. I'd rather not be proven right on this one.
After reading all the anecdotes on here, I wanted to write down one of my own experiences that still freaks me out just thinking about it. Just down the road from where a few years ago I had previously lived in southeast Australia, is the opening into about 100 acres of woodlands and bush that I frequently went into when I was younger to do the usual things, riding and camping, etc. I was out driving at around 11:30 p.m. with my girlfriend, and as we were in the area, I decided to show her the woodlands, as she loves everything to do with nature and it was summer, so it was an extremely warm night. I left my car with the lights shining into the trees, as we weren't going too far in, and it was pitch black inside. The two of us just kind of sat, chatting, having a smoke and generally relaxing. She was sitting on a sort of a map of the area, and I was keeping an eye on the trees as I had a feeling that something was just wrong. I read on here a few people have said that they have felt that they were in danger, although nothing around them was off, and it was the same feeling. Every sense was almost reaching out, and my adrenaline was up, but there wasn't really anything in my eyeline that seemed any different. After lighting another cigarette to calm my nerves, I scanned the tree line again, and realized that it looked different to before. It was only after staring into the dark that I saw that there was moonlight now, lighting up grass where it couldn't before, as there was a black shape blocking it, which, before, I thought was a tree. I've got goosebumps just typing this, but the only way to describe was that all sound just ceased, and everything went dead silent. A few seconds later, this disgusting feeling of dread fell over me, and I saw motion in the dark of the path, as this thing crawled towards us on all fours. I've seen nearly every animal in the outback here, and we don't have any large predators like in the US or Europe, but somehow I knew this thing was a predator, and it wasn't hiding itself from us, but just slowly crawling forward towards us. I don't know if my girlfriend saw it or not, as I couldn't look away, but just as it reached the line my car lights were able to illuminate, it reared up onto two legs and just sat, staring at us. I'm 6'4", and this thing was about another meter larger than me, with arms that were far too long that reached down near the ground. All I could make out was an off-white, almost yellowish fur on it, and in the dim light could make out the silhouette of its head as like a dog or wolf. I wasn't able to move as it stared at me, but it was at this point my girlfriend gasped, which seemed to break whatever was stopping me from thinking logically. I grabbed her by the arm and sprinted to my car, slammed the doors and tore out of there as fast as I could, both of us too scared to speak until about half an hour later. We've both discussed it many times, and the feeling that we had was what I imagine a rabbit feels when it catches a wolf or fox looking at it. That this is something that would be able to end us with absolute ease if it chose. Neither of us have been able to come up with any explanation for what it was, but it has definitely changed the way I view the woods and bush. And when I go camping or hiking now, I think back to that and wonder what it was, and if I will ever see anything like it again.
I've been all around Australia. Take my word for it, the best way to see this country is by car. There's just so many little hidden secrets and pockets of paradise you miss if you try to do it all by bus or simply jetting between the major cities. My memories of road tripping Australia are, for the most part, positive. Sure, there's been some ups and downs, but that's life, isn't it? You just keep on pushing forward. And that's what I did. There is one notable stopover that still stands out though. An event which very nearly convinced me to pack in my adventurous spirit for good. I will recount this as best I can. This was sometime around late September. I was headed from Barrage Bay up to Narooma. It's a gorgeous coastal drive for the most part, aside from one little detour inland as you pass Wallaga Lake. The best part of road tripping is the impulsivity, especially when you're driving a fully equipped camper van like me. You can pull in just about anywhere for a break, as long as the area you're pulling up at isn't illegal for camping and whatnot. And so I did, as I came around the bending roads of that beautiful lakeside drive. I found this picture-perfect spot to camp out for the night. Remote, peaceful, just the way I liked it. I set up my camp, got a hot pot of coffee going, and kicked back in the deck chair, soaking up the sun. I got there right on sunset, so it was absolutely ideal. September can be a little bit warmer, but in the mornings and in the evenings that time of year, you won't find better weather down under. I was gazing out over the crystal clear blue waters when I heard someone speaking. They said. This startled me. It was not a language I recognized, and there was no one around. Well, there certainly was not a moment ago anyway. Again, that same voice. That's when I realized there was no one around. I was hearing this voice in my head. Bloody hell, I must be out of it. It has been a long drive. Louder this time, and sending shockwaves through my head. Every time it spoke out, it was like the kick of a bass drum reverberating from the inside of my brain. It hurt. That's when shit got real bizarre. 3 kids came tearing out of the bush, breaking the tree line right behind my camper. They were shouting at me, pointing to the road, screaming, "Go, go, leave now." The kids were clearly indigenous. Don't get the wrong idea, I don't mean some stereotypical image of indigenous Australian tribes living deep in the bush. They were just some local kids from a nearby camp. They sure seemed to know something I didn't though, and it didn't sound good. I decided that I'd best heed their advice. This, coupled with that weird voice, was giving me a bad feeling. I packed up my stuff and I scrambled back inside my camper. I strapped into the driver's seat, turned the engine over, and flicked on the high beams. As I did so, they shot straight into the dark bushland ahead and illuminated something massive. It was huge. I shit you not, 12 foot at the bare minimum. It had an almost spider-like appearance. Its arms and legs stuck straight out to the sides. Its face was pale white. You ever see those Slender Man stories? Kinda like him, but with a nasty look on his face. His eyes were beady and black, and its body, it was just like a shadowy mass. In my head, a voice, like before, but it said no words, just a low growl. The kids started bashing and kicking my camper now, but not as if they meant me harm or anything. They were urging me to leave. They screamed something out at me, a word I'll never forget. Dulagal, Dulagal. Again, that voice from before. but much louder this time, echoed through my head.
Angwaranangi.
I watched as this thing slowly, yet deliberately, pivoted on its right foot and then began walking sideways towards my car. That was it. I was out. I stepped on the pedal and floored it down the highway. As I sped off down that road, I caught a glimpse of this abomination wobbling sideways, step by step. It was coming down the highway, following my car. Thankfully, for whatever reason, it did not appear capable of picking up any kind of speed, and I watched as it slowly disappeared into the darkness of the night. That was the first and last time that I've ever seen anything in my travels I would call otherworldly. I did not need to look very far for answers as to what I bore witness to that dark September night. A simple search for a single word those kids shouted at me turned up everything I needed to know. Doolagal. Straight out of Wikipedia, the Doolagal is a humanoid creature of Aboriginal dreamings. He is said to have bright, red eyes, and he stalks Mount Gulaga, walking sideways. See, where I was camped, it was a straight shot south from Mount Gulaga. So, I guess it fits. Why he was down by the lakeside when he's said to stalk the mountain, I don't know. Maybe he sees all this land surrounding the mountain as his territory. Maybe he was on the hunt. I don't know. The search did lead me to look into another phrase I heard that night. The words which constantly reverberated inside my mind. From what I could dig up, this is of the Gunayandi language, and it loosely translates to, "Please, go." What I can't figure out is whether this voice in my head was this Doolagal, or if it was something else. This Doolagal, it did not appear to have my best interests in mind. No, everything about its demeanor looked as though it meant me harm. The actions of the kids too, they were frantically urging me to get out. Like they knew if I stayed there, something bad would happen. If it weren't for them, maybe it would have. But nah, I don't reckon it was that Doolagal talking to me that night. He would have been quite happy to sneak right up on me. Still to this day, I can't shake that image of that awkward, sideways walk as he lumbered out from those trees.
Okay, so I live in Australia. It's currently autumn, and I live on the outskirts of a major city, still in the suburbs. This happened today in the late afternoon when I went to hang some washing on the line under our carport attached to the side of our house. We were starting to lose daylight, so I thought I'd quickly pop out and hang up the last of the washing for the day. It was increasingly getting darker by the minute. I had just begun hanging clothes when I started to get an uneasy feeling. I'm unsure why. I brushed it off as I was losing daylight quickly. A minute later, I heard a group of kids up the other end of the street, screaming, and then silence. Again, I brushed it off as the kids just being kids and playing with each other. The intensity of unease grew, and I felt like I was being watched. I then heard a low growl, which was unlike anything I'd ever heard. and the air got significantly colder, and all the crickets and bugs went silent. I moved the clothes rack to outside the carport so I could use what little light there was to hurry this up as much as possible. While hanging and scanning around between picking up the next piece of clothing, I noticed something new. This dense garden that wrapped around our U-shaped drive looked poor, like maybe it had been trampled in a decent section, maybe 13 feet of garden. I intensely felt I was really being watched by something, and right before finishing the clothes, the feeling started to ease off a little, and it began to warm back up, like it was when I initially came outside. I was raised with big dogs, Rottweilers, German Shepherds, etc., and grew up in rural countryside. I've heard all kinds of animal sounds, from wild dogs, foxes, koalas fighting, possums and bats. I've never in my life heard a growl like this before. I don't know how to explain it, but it did not sound natural. It sounded closest to a dog, but something about it was very wrong. Before going outside, my indoor cat desperately wanted outside. Once I came inside, she was acting completely different, sulking around and all fur puffed up. She then was following me at my ankles around the house, which is not normal for her. We have a lot of bushland surrounding us and live next to a river, which is behind us. I don't fish in that river anymore, as I've always felt like something was around. I have a few more experiences. The first one is back in 2015 in December, around Christmas. My boyfriend at the time, now ex, invited my family to have a Christmas dinner at their house, and we were coming home after spending time there for quite a few hours. We both lived in small, separate, rural towns, and it took 25 minutes to drive, doing the speed limit of 100 km per hour to get to his. In between was nothing, except large acres of land owned mostly by farmers and the occasional house, but extremely spread out. This is your typical Aussie countryside, with overgrown dead tall grass lining the sides of the bitumen roads, filled with tall eucalyptus trees on both sides. Driving back in the dark, we automatically do 20 km under the speed limit, due to the wallabies and roos. They have a bad habit of darting across right in front of cars and blend in well with the tall dead grass. Instinctively, we continuously are scanning the sides of the road and paddocks to see if there was any wildlife we need to slow down or stop for. I was in the front passenger seat, closest to the side of the road, when it was pitch black and we were in the dead middle of nowhere at the halfway mark towards home. I saw this huge black animal, sort of running, kind of cross how a bear and a gorilla would run. This thing was keeping pace with our car, a big dual cab ute, doing 80 k's. It looked like a bear, crossed with something, but seriously deranged. When I fully looked at it, it looked straight at me, and its eyes glowed red. I let out what my mother described as a blood-curdling scream, and she reacted by slamming the brakes, thinking we were about to hit something. As she was nearly at a complete halt, she turned to me and asked, "What? What is it? What are we slowing down for?" I yelled at her out of panic. "Did you see that? Did you see that?" And then I yelled at her, "Don't stop, keep driving now." She started speeding up again, and at this point the thing had vanished, and I started telling her what I saw. She thought I was making it up, and thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, as in Australia we don't have bears or anything like what I saw. Years later I did some research, and turns out yowies have been reported to have red eyes when reflecting light, which shared a shocking resemblance to what I remember seeing that night. At least, I hope that is what I saw, and not something more sinister. Second experience. I was again coming back from spending a few days for Christmas with my now partner's family. I was driving back home. His family lived in a major city, and we still were living out in the country, so this was a 3-hour drive. Mostly 100 km/h roads, except for exiting through the city. About an hour and a half away from home, We were in the middle of nowhere, going up a tightly winding mountain range, thick with native forestry. My partner needed to take a leak, so the next dirt road I could find off the side I drove down. Most dirt roads are single lane, and here we move off onto the shoulder if someone is coming the opposite direction. But we were absolutely nowhere, and that chance was almost next to none. I was looking for a spot that I could pull over, but did not expect this dirt road to keep going and going and going. No houses in sight at all, and there hadn't been for a very long time prior to pulling into this road. After about 15 minutes, I find the only spot I could possibly park and pull a very tight U-turn and park up. We decide the area is lovely, surrounded by bushland and tall trees. It was afternoon, but still plenty of light, although the sun was starting to set. So we decided to kill the engine and hang out for a bit to enjoy the scenery. My partner finishes his business, and I step out to join him. We had been trying to start a family for a few months now, but it did not seem to be going well for us. We were both wanting some us time to take our minds off things and have a break from life. Then, out of absolutely nowhere, somewhere in the distance, we both hear a baby's crying. There were no houses, no people as far as the eye could see, and it sounded to be coming from the bushland. Only there was a steep, gradual decline down to the bushland off the road. We both verified what we had heard, and that we are hearing what we think we are. I worried initially about what if someone has dumped a baby, this area being so deserted. Then we both get an immense, sickening feeling of overwhelming fear and dread as the crying continues and gets significantly louder and closer within a few seconds. We both get in the car as quickly as humanly possible, and without losing traction, we get out of there as fast as I can safely. We both had an intense feeling in the pit of our stomachs that we should not be there and needed to get out. To add to the strangeness, turns out I found out 2 months later I was pregnant, and would have been pregnant at the time we had that experience. I would have reported the baby crying, but 1, no phone signal. 2, this road did not have a name and was not signed. And 3, there was no way someone could have gotten down there alive, also while carrying a baby. And there was no tracks, tire marks, footprints, zip, zilch, nothing. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. If you have a story to share, please send it to my email in the description below. This channel is mostly made up of stories sent in by viewers or people they know, or people I know. Another way to support the channel is to sign up for my Patreon, where you can watch my videos ad-free. More perks will be added once I get back from Australia in November. Also, I will be redoing my merch store when I get back, so keep an eye out for that one. Thank you all for your continuous support. And remember,
Papa loves you.